Hey guys, here we are for another Toolbox talk. It's like 33 or something. Excuse my voice. I was sick for a couple weeks. I posted the last video and then I've been in Saudi Arabia in 45 degree heat for a week. So AC in and out, 45, good fun. Anyway, today I'm going to start something on slack lines because I've seen them misused so much. I've seen them used in every possible wrong scenario. I've seen them, I won't even go into it. It is what it is. Everybody thinks, oh yeah, slack line. Yeah, but there's some parameters on the slack line you need to observe or else they're gonna fuck you every time. The week I was just doing it, we had a 110 plus meter long slack line, duals for redundancy. And we were flying someone along them up to 15 meters off the ground. The cranes were 50 meters to the pick points. So some basic math when you set slack lines up. I've done a little visual aid here. This is our shackle load. This is our floating pulley. This is our pulley here. That's our dead, which you'll notice is not deaded at the fucking top of the rig, the top of the crane, the top of the perms where you can't get at it. It is brought back down to the ground and tied off where you can adjust stuff. Okay, this plays in later when you have rigs that are flying, you have dual slack lines, you need adjustments, you don't just tie them off the top because it's a pain in the ass. So you'll notice, dead tie, redirect to the ground, load, floating pulley, Mr. Shackle here, and we have the active pulley here. I have my line. We have our spacing. On the blackboard, I've marked the center line where this naturally falls in the midpoint between that pulley and this pulley. Here's your pulley marked. Here's your pulley mark. So you can do some basic math, okay? So this is a setup. This is a slack line. Now, this is gonna be a short one today because I'm losing a lot of my patience. So I'm just gonna go through this quickly. The higher your pick points, the better off you are. For every bit of distance here, you need more distance here. Here's an example. In 100 meters, you need to be 50 meters high to get about 40% from the ground of height. So that means 40% of 50 meters. So you can get about 15 to 20 meters, 35 or 40% of height before you start going so flat that you fuck yourself. Now, folks, what I mean that is, you all know, in a V like this, we have a 2-to-1. So we have mechanical advantage. If this is tied off, we pick this up, this weight is going to be half of what it is. Sounds great. The flatter you get this, the more this goes up until these are bone tight. It becomes an infinite load and an infinite weight on both anchor points and on what it takes to motivate. Okay? So let's just review that. Height is your friend. Doesn't matter if this is a hand pull, a ratchet, a winch. This is your motivation, okay? Now, of course, you can get away with a lot more bullshit in terms of geometry if you have this as a winch or as a, whatever it is that's a ratchet, then you can over by hand pull. Put a 100 kilo guy over here. This is an 80 kilo person. Here, they might be 80 kilo. Here, if this was this close, they'd be 40 or 50 kilo. You go up to here, suddenly that 80 kilo person's 150 kilo. You go up to here and they're 250, 300, 400 kilo. Well, you ain't gonna be doing anything over here hand pulling, okay? So remember, there's a relationship between height, weight, and force. That's the first one we're gonna get into. I'll keep it short. Remember, your slack lines are only gonna give you about 30% to 40% of the height of your pick points over any form of distance. Okay? That's it. That's it. And if this is 50 meters and this is the ground at 0, you're going to be able to fly here quite well. Anything more than that is going to become a problem. So you would need to go higher to keep your belly geometry. And I say 35, 40% is usually a max because then you're pulling your anchor points. Okay, we had two 100-ton cranes with a 100 kilo load, 100 meters plus 110 meters apart. The 100-ton cranes at the height we had them with the jib we're good for 5 tons, okay? So there's math you can follow for these kind of high lines. You can look it up online anywhere, and you can calculate as this gets flatter what that load goes up to. Okay, we would have exceeded 5 tons at a certain height point, but because I put them so high and so wide, I knew I was only going to get to a certain point. I was not going to exceed 1 ton. Okay, it's kind of embarrassing to tip over a 100-ton crane with a single person on it, but it can be done. You got to look at your numbers. So the important factors when you set up a slack line are distance apart in relation to height you want to achieve. Okay, the farther apart, the higher you got to go. This shows up when people decide they're going to try to use a slack line on a set that's 10 meters long that has a 3-meter ceiling, and they have to rig it inside. Ain't gonna work. It's gonna be a tensioned high line because you have no headroom. If you could get a slack line in there, you could go to the perms, which are 10, 12, 15 meters. Then you're starting to talk a reasonable thing, because at 15 meters, you'll be able to get somebody 5 meters off the ground, no problem, if you had the inside headroom. So now you're gonna be working on a better advantage. You're at half of that, so your weight's gonna be far less, and it'll work. The problem is, we use these slacklines are used not just to lift. The whole point of a slackline is this weight can roll along this belly so you can handle movement. As opposed to a single pendulum point, which here's the low point. If you come back, you go high, you go low, you come high. With a slackline, you can come back here and pull on this line and keep the person traveling level all the way across. There's some other advantages I'll get into, but there's what you get, okay? This is a way of progressing linear motion at a set height across a distance, okay? So typically you would always mark your center points. You don't work from one side to the other. Once you set up your 2 points, everything depends on this center point. Your math is all from the center point. You offset. How far do I want to travel? Offset 10%, 20, 30. So if this right here represented 150 meters, I offset on this last gig 25 meters. And I went up 15. And as I went up to the 15 point, it progressed across. And as I got to the other side, notice what's happening here is it's trying to climb the V bridle in the wrong direction. So you have braking. It's going to come to a stop on its own. Okay, so these are things that help us. You still, if it's a really savage big one, like even bigger, and you've got a very good V, if you start here, the person's going to move so fast, you're going to need a brake line on the traveler or on the person. So these are all add-ons. But the reality is you offset from the center and work from a distance one side to the other, which usually never exceeds 50%. Never exceeds 50% of your height. And again, it's about, in reality, for a nice level flight runs 30 to 40%. You can get 50 out of it with a little bowstringing or manipulation on the motivational end. But in just starting here, you have to put X amount of slack into the line and pull, and now it'll come up to height, proceed across height, and start to break. You'll have this working area where it's level. So the person can linearly move. Now it's also, you can do arcs. People could be running along and go from here and down to there. You could set them down. So you could do it in 2 directions. Like with a ratchet, you could pull up, they will belly across, get to here, you can let them out and set them down. Okay? So all of this math works based on several things. Height, measuring everything from your center lines. Length, there are proportions that need to be observed to be a true slack line. Otherwise, you're not truly slacklining it. You're basically running a high line, and you will either have to motivate and pull the person along, or you will have to have heavy ballast because your anchors will go astronomically high. We did a very long double slack line on a show, and we had ton and a half ballasts, and we were routinely picking them off the ground from this point. The lines going on both ends were lifting 1.5 tons, no problem. Okay, so you start multiplying these forces, and I suggest you look at highlining and you look at the forces generated in Glaram's book on tensioned lines and on the angles. I'll come to it next week, I'll look it up, but there's some specific angle call outs on what your forces are between this, 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 this. So you calculate your angle based on your distance, your ground, and your point where you want to go, okay? So my rule of thumb, which is a general parameter, is I will never go more than 30 to 40%. Now, if it's a hand pull, I'm never going to exceed 30%, period, because it just gets infinitely too hard to pull on this. You can't have 3 guys in a trained monkey jumping on a fucking rope over here. Now, if you got a ratchet, you got a winch, you could maybe get a little more, but you have to work with your mechanical advantage. So I never go more than 30 to 40% of the height of my pulleys, and you go the distance, you will never have a travel that's more than about 40% of your distance. If you try to get more, you'll end up pulling on one end, and it will also mean that you're using some form of alternate force to get it up there. Because to move this here becomes infinitely more difficult. I'm gonna fix that up so that we're not fucking with it next time I talk. Okay, so these are some big considerations. Okay, height, length, the V you have, the linear travel you need, the height you need in comparison percentage-wise to your pick points. Okay, so these denote a real slack line. When used correctly, this can be a great way to lift and move people. It can be a great way to fly people. It's a very controllable. It has self-braking so that over distance, like this last week, we were able to fly people 110 meters with the cranes. I was flying them 40 meters plus, and then they were coming to a gradual stop on their own. Now, because I didn't roll into the belly, they just stopped because that was the high point. They stopped as they went into the reverse of this. It slowed them down, okay? Then they would gradually, slowly roll back. After the shot was cut, they'd come back towards the belly and we'd reset them. For the number ones, we'd bring them out all the way to here, 25 meters off center, here, and then we would take them up and over. So it would self-brake instead of needing a brake line because the speed wasn't exorbitant and it looked quite well. Even though we had the provisions in for that, we weren't needing it. If you need more and it's an ideal line, you can still put a pull line this way to maybe get a little more distance. So you'd run a shiv to the middle of your boom. So at your high pick point, you can pull across to that, okay? And then you'd have another form of motivation there, whether that's a large counterweight rig or whatever you could use to accelerate it. If you need more speed than what you need rolling in the bridles, then what you would do is add a pulling force as well. We use these with ratchets. A sudden pull up, if the person is offset, we did this on Game of Thrones, we had a 3-to-1 on a ratchet and brought it from the front of the set over the entire set, and we're able to land them on one mat. The actual square footage, 2.5 meter by 1.5 meter or 2 meters, it was like a bed. So we'd pick them up way out here because we had it was offset so much, it was right under the pick point. And we were able to pick him up at that, travel him, and as he worked into the other one, before he could roll back, we got to this point, and we would allow him to roll out and set down because he was decreasing speed at the end of his travel, and we would ease him out under braking and set him down. Okay? So these are all things you can do, but you have to observe distance between pulleys, center lines, height of travel, height of pulleys, and also make it so you can adjust this shit because there's some really nice things to do. I mean, it's a simple rig. You tie it off there and pull here, you're done in its basic format. But when you're working on set, there's a huge list of things that change and you need the adjustment, you need to be able to play with this. It's better to put them in and it takes a little bit extra time. So we're going to get into the actual math of this. I'm going to fix this bar because my visual aid, I don't want landing on my head today. But this is the beginning of slack lines. So first you need to look up if you're interested at all. And funny to me, some people have actually started their own side quests on some of the topics that we've brought up on this. And that's impressive to me that if people are interested enough, they will go off on their own side quests on various topics. And I don't say everything I know is correct, but everything I say, it can be proven mathematically and empirically. And I don't rely on wives' tales. So if you go on your own quest and you suddenly prove what I've told you, that means you've taken the time to learn why, and it's a really cool thing. So on this, if you look up your anchors and what this does to your anchors and it does to your forces, and also look up the angle, because in Glirham's book, they do tell you the angle from this, which if this is fixed and you're pulling off out a pulley here, you're pulling like this. Now I'm 2 to 1, so it's half the weight versus the wider and flatter this gets. Okay, so just some thoughts. We'll get into it. These were used a lot by tree guys. This is used a lot by linemen out in the bush pulling towers over canyons and ravines, because it's an effective way to transport things linearly as well as lift them. I mean, there's a lot that can be done with these, but the main thing is you can't use one in a very low environment, meaning height restricted, unless you have access to high points beyond that, and then you run into things like these lines hitting the edges of your set ceiling and things. So you have to really look at your parameters. And an open space is ideal. It becomes easy. You just set them up as high and as wide as you fucking want and rock and roll, and you use the sweet spot. So if you want 15 meters here, you mark it. You can mark your mark for pulling height. You can go back, so you set this at 15 meters. You know he's at 15 meters. Then you can bring him back and put slack until he's back at your, like the last one, 25 or 30 meters. And when you pick him up, he will go to the 15 meter mark, go straight across 40 meters and start to slow down. So that's just some basic math based, and it was kind of lucky because we were 110 meters. So it puts it close to the 100 meter mark for discussion. Okay, so that's just an initial hit on slack lines. Next time, because I don't want to spend more time on this, these have gotten long, and this is going to require some time. You need to think about all of these factors and do some research on anchor weights and look at the configuration. You always need, on a crane that's 50 meters in the air, tying that up top is really stupid because you have no way to deal with it. You bring everything to the ground all the time. Same thing on set, 14 meters in the air in the reds. You don't want some squirrel having to run up there to do something. So you bring it through a pulley and bring it down. Tie it where you can get at it. And a lot of times, like on this last one, because I ran duals, and the angle of the boom, I didn't want to put truss up there on the jib. I ended up with 2 separate lines, and I had rigs at the bottom with static line, very low stretch helicopter rappel line, which was 2%, up to where at its setting it was here. And I had all of this was static to a rig, but if I wanted, I could have shortened this all I wanted by just taking it in at the bottom. So you have an adjustment there, and then here I had adjustments here because I took this and ran it through a service loop on the boom so I could bring in and take out slack. So when I do this, and I bring the guy to here, I would set him and then bring up all my tension on him to tension him, and then we would pull the mark. Okay? So these are all ways of doing it that make things much nicer. Just a quick one, intro to slack lines today. Look at the few things here. Mechanical advantage. Look at what the charts say about the V, what this does to your weight. You can find it easily, and if not, you can do the math by turning this into 2 triangles and know with your angle, it'll tell you what the weight is. There's charts galore. And then, next time you'll be prepared for us going through a few more details. I want to anchor these down so I don't whack myself in the head. All right, so that's just an intro to slack lines. Bottom line, you need height. The longer you want to fly, the higher you need to go to keep it real. You're never going to see more than 35 to 40% on a self-motivated slack line. If it's properly done, you're never going to see more than 40% of the height of your pick point, period, or else you're pulling too flat. And you're going to either start lifting your anchors, because that's ton and a half, 2, 3 tons. If you have unlimited strength, possibly, but then you're also limited by your line diameter. 6 millimeter, 8 millimeter, or you're going to use 12 millimeters, so that's 9 tons of the rope I use. So you can play games with these things, but the reality is if you follow the formulas first, you can achieve a lot. All right? Just an intro into slacklines, guys. Just some thoughts today because I was in the shop putting gear away from doing this gag. And I set this up quickly, and I'm going to finish it up and make it nicer, and then we'll go from there. All right? Take care.